Check out the new Vladivostok Judo Club t-shirt from Gotch Fightwear. Only at gotchfightwear.com.
Welcome to the final part of my Father of Sambo series, where we explore the life of a man widely credited as the father of one of the most brutal and effective submission arts ever conceived. In today's video, Vasili Oshchepkov, Father of Sambo, Part 3. By October of 1922, Vasili was back to his birthplace in the island of Sakhalin, working as a spy for the Russian intelligence. The island was very different from how he left it. Penal servitude had been completely abolished by royal decree back in April 1906, 1 year before he moved to Japan. And by 1913, all formerly exiled settlers have had their rights restored and only a municipal prison remained. Vasili's official reason to be on the island was as an entrepreneur. He played films for the local population, something like a mobile cinema. This service was free of charge for the Japanese military personnel, which allowed him to move freely around the island and granted him access to different military units. This, and his knowledge of the Japanese language and culture, gained him the trust of army officials. The money he received from the Soviet government was sent irregularly, with long delays, and was not enough for him to survive and keep the operation afloat. Not to mention, he had to keep track of receipts from all purchases, and even translate some of them to Russian. So, to fund his cinema business, he got a job at Dobraflot, a ship transport company that made trips to the Far East. In addition to the extra income, he now had legal access to steamships without arousing suspicions from the Japanese authorities. According to declassified reports, Vasili sent intelligence information to the mainland in a metal candy box with a false bottom, and he used onion juice as invisible ink to conceal the content of some documents. Despite all his efforts, the lack of resources threatened the operation. It's on record that Vasili, aka Agent DD, sent his superiors a request for new films to keep the cinema active. His request was denied. In a letter dated October 16, 1923, Vasili writes, "I received a letter dated September 28. I can't remain in Sakhalin without films in the winter. If you value me as a representative of your company, send me 15 films immediately." He ended up buying the films himself in Vladivostok, with the help of his friend Trofim. He also purchased a photo camera that he used for intelligence work with his own money. That same year, he married Ekaterina Zhuravleva. The marriage lasted approximately 1 year. It's speculated that she was the sister of his seminary classmate, Gavril Zhuravleva, and this marriage was necessary for Vasili to obtain Japanese documents, which he did that year. In 1924, he was appointed by his superiors to expand his coverage to South Sakhalin, Korea, Formosa, and Japan. He declined, but accepted to move to Japan. It's believed Oshchepkov's intelligence work contributed to the negotiations that returned North Sakhalin to the Russians in 1925. The last quarter of 1924 was particularly busy for Oshchepkov, who got divorced and married a 17-year-old named Maria Grigorievna. During that period, he was briefly in Khabarovsk, Harbin, Shanghai, and finally arrived in the city of Kobe in Japan with his new wife on November 23rd or 24th, 1924. According to Maria's documents, the new Oshchepkov's residence was in a village near the city of Kobe. In February 1925, Vasili discovered the Japanese police had been tipped off about a Soviet intelligence officer named DD working undercover in Kobe. He sent a message to Khabarovsk requesting they change his pseudonym, and he was given the name Monk. During this period, he made some trips to Harbin and Tokyo to buy films for his business and attend meetings with his superiors from the OGPU, which was the intelligence service and secret police of the Soviet Union from 1923 to 1934. By August 1925, Oshchepkov completed the preparatory stage of his intelligence work and was appointed to move to Tokyo. He wrote a list of 10 tasks he needed to complete in Tokyo that included making acquaintances with key people in the military, enrolling in a jiu-jitsu club close to a regiment, instructing his wife to teach Russian lessons if necessary, etc. He began completing these tasks, but thanks to the incompetence of his superiors, his economical situation got so precarious that on some occasions he couldn't even afford basic things like transportation. He had to reach out to some of his personal contacts for help. At this time, his wife fell severely ill with tuberculosis, and to make things worse, he learned he was under surveillance of the Japanese authorities, so he had to lay low for a while. In April 1926, Vasili received an immediate order from his superiors, who were dissatisfied with his work and wanted him to go back to Soviet territory. He was given no time to close the company, contact his acquaintances, or, most importantly, move his wife out of Tokyo. He answered stating he couldn't move because of his wife's illness, but his response was not accepted. So he went to Vladivostok alone and sent for his wife on May 7, 1926. 3 days later, a secret circular was sent to the ministers of Internal and Foreign Affairs of Japan regarding a suspect, a 34-year-old film distributor named Vasili Oshchepkov. Now with his cover likely blown, he was not able to go back to Japan. However, he was not safer in Russia. Upon arrival, he was accused not only of doing a poor job, but also of embezzling the sum of 3,140 yen, which is roughly 18,000 US dollars today, for not presenting the necessary receipts to justify his expenses. Some of his superiors were pushing for a trial. An indignant Oshchepkov wrote an official statement where he responded in detail to the accusations. As it turns out, the incompetent officials in charge didn't even understand some of the intelligence Vasili had been sending them, and they just stored it. He offered to reimburse them for the money and sold the film projector he had bought with his own money to settle the debt. He didn't go to trial. Instead, he was sent to the headquarters of the Siberian Military District as a translator. The couple lived in the city of Novosibirsk. Vasili, who was also fluent in English, offered to translate additional documents in exchange for higher compensation to cover his wife's medical treatments. He also started a new judo group and was finally able to return to practicing and teaching the martial art he loved. The next decade was his most productive, not only as a grappler, but for the development of what several years later would be known as Sambo. It was during this period when he shared the mats with Pavel Azanchevsky, a former Tsarist officer who received his education at the military gymnastics school in Joinville, France, where in addition to gymnastics, he learned fencing, boxing, and savate. Pavel had also fought professionally in the ring. Vasili's other influence was the Englishman, Ernest John Harrison, a catch wrestler who was 20 years his senior and who graduated from the Kodokan only 2 years before Vasili, becoming the first foreign-born person to earn a Kodokan Judo black belt. Harrison was the author of several books, including one about catch wrestling. These influences dramatically expanded Vasili's worldview as a martial artist and coach. In 1927, Vasili published an article in the district's newspaper, Red Army Star, with the title Jiu-Jitsu for the Red Army, where he stated that jiu-jitsu was recognized as the best system of self-defense by countries like England, France, Germany, and America, and that it was necessary for them to incorporate it as well, along with fencing and rifle work, not in the form of boring techniques like stabbing a dummy with a bayonet, but in practice, combining jiu-jitsu and weapons in combat. For this, he said each unit must acquire a sufficient amount of masks, breastplates, and wooden rifles. This training should be practiced outdoors, in the morning and evening, every day for at least 1 hour. This is no propaganda, he claimed. This is an attempt to save the lives of those who will inevitably find themselves face to face with a better trained opponent. On August 14, 1927, Oshchepkov began teaching at the Proletarian Sports Dynamo in his city of Novosibirsk. His students included OGPU officers. Also in August, he visited Moscow for the first time in his life and gave an exhibition at a Spartakiad sports event. We don't know the exact year, but it had to be around this time his wife passed away from tuberculosis. In the span of 1.5 years, he managed to train a group of approximately 30 hand-to-hand combat instructors at the OGPU border school. In the autumn of 1929, a grieving Vasili moved to Moscow. In 1930, he took part in a bayonet fighting tournament. As the Red Star newspaper reported, first place in the command staff category was taken by the UDKA instructor, Comrade Oshchepkov. An eyewitness described what bayonet fighting was. The competitions were of exceptional interest since the new rules of combat allowed combined techniques to defeat the enemy. This included blows with the butt of the rifle, strangulations, freestyle wrestling, and disarming. Vasili continued competing and winning tournaments in Moscow, and when there was no one in his division, he would give an exhibition. While in Moscow, he married a seamstress named Anna Ivanovna, who was a widow and had a daughter. Around this time, his popularity grew and his financial situation improved. In this footage, produced by Vasili himself, we can see some demonstrations of practical applications of his system. Here, we have Vasili sharing his knowledge with a group of students. Some of them are wearing an early version of the Sambo uniform. Finally, Vasili demonstrates some techniques against weapons. In April 1934, Vasili wrote a letter to the Supreme Council of Physical Culture, where he mentioned that, in Moscow, he became more familiar with the self-defense system of Spiridonov. Viktor Spiridonov is considered one of the founders of Sambo. He wrote the first army manual for self-defense in 1927. Spiridonov's system was originally referred to as Jiu-Jitsu, then Sam, and then Samoz. It was only after Oshchepkov's and Spiridonov's death that the term Sambo was coined. I'll make another video comparing Oshchepkov's and Spiridonov's contributions to the creation of Sambo. It's important to acknowledge Oshchepkov was an effective educator, and wherever he went, he managed to pass on his system in a very structured way. Some of his best students, like Kharlampiv, Galkovsky, Vasiliev, Rubanchik, and Dashkevich, among many others who were ranked by him, continued teaching and organizing tournaments, especially Anatoly Kharlampiv, who carried Vasili's legacy and was instrumental in the development of Sambo. In 1935, Vasili suffered a heart-related health complication. He was on bed rest when a young Andrei Budzinskaya, who went on to become one of the first Sambo champions, Anatoly Kharlampiv and other senior students came to visit their teacher. According to the author, at the end of 1936, despite Spiridonov's resistance, Oshchepkov's system reached the all-union level. On October 11th, a special judo section was created in the newly formed All-Union Committee for Physical Culture and Sports under the Council of the People's Commissars of the USSR, with Oshchepkov as head of the division and some of his students as chairman. In 1937, the Soviet government decided to purge all potential double agents and threats to the regime. Anyone who had worked for a Japanese company qualified as a suspect, even though that was a requirement for some agents who were not even allowed to disclose classified operations in a trial. In the following days, they started arresting, torturing, and murdering former intelligence officers. Some of Vasili's acquaintances and their wives suffered extrajudicial executions. On Wednesday, September 29, 1937, prosecutor Julius Berman approved an arrest order for Vasili Sergeyevich Oshchepkov. He was taken into custody on October 1st. According to official reports, Vasili Oshchepkov died on Sunday, October 10, 1937, at 6:55 p.m. in the Butyrka prison. He was born in a prison and died in a prison. The doctor on duty stated in his death certificate, "It can be assumed that the death of Oshchepkov V.S. came during an attack of angina pectoris." 2 decades later, on February 2, 1957, a resolution on the rehabilitation of Vasili Oshchepkov was signed, which stated, "It is clear from the case content that Oshchepkov was arrested by the NKVD without any evidence confirming that he carried out hostile activities against the USSR." In 1960, a TV show featuring Sambo champion Andrei Budzinski credits Vasili Oshchepkov as the creator of Sambo. This is the end of our Father of Sambo series. Special thanks goes to my student, Sergei Morozov, head of Catch Wrestling Russia, for translating some of the documents used for this video.
Don't forget to check out the new Brazilian Luta Livre t-shirt from Gotch Fightwear. The links are in the description or visit gotchfightwear.com.
This video was produced by Didos and the World Submission Wrestling Federation. Join the World Submission Wrestling Federation. Visit our official website at submissionwrestlingarts.com.